welcome back to République. The Prizrak are revolting. And we're helping! You might even recognise this room, through all the debris and the surprisingly poor smoke textures. It's the boys' dorm.
Keep an eye out for bigger parties.
Or the cafeteria, anyway. Or what's left of the cafeteria. My favourite detail in this scene is the lines of black soot stretching up from the vent exit. The intel that used to be here is gone now, but it's been replaced.
Derringer, sir. How can I help you?
Where the hell you been?
I was...
ATD?
No,
You know what this is?
It looks like what we would call a снежный шар.
It's a snow globe.
Yes, that is all. Yes.
But it's got me concerned. You know what concerns me about it, Gorin? The fact that I found it and not you.
Where did you find it?
Someone left it outside Marie Prideaux's door.
Why would they do that?
You tell me, Special Investigator Man.
Maybe she has a secret admirer.
She definitely has secrets. And there's the matter of the note.
I'm afraid I don't understand.
There was a note attached to the bottom of this thing.
May I see the note?
I sent it to the lab for analysis.
That's good thinking.
Shut up! Do you know what the note said? It said, looks like we're snowed in together. Not snowed in, but one word. Snowed in.
That is very strange note.
Do you know who Edward Snowden was?
Was he a Prizrak?
He was a traitor. And it's clear we have a traitor of our own here in Metamorphosis.
My goodness.
And somehow Murray is mixed up with them.
Not the mentor.
Find this person, Gorin. Don't make me find him myself.
As a great man once said, I know writers who use subtext. And they're all cowards. There's a line of approach to games crit that, broadly, I'm not sure how I feel about, but you can certainly have some fun with it now and again. It goes like this. Every game tells the story of its own development. République certainly does not fail to offer some entertainment when read in this light. And I mean, how could it not? It's a bizarre, clunky, 4 or 5 hour stealth game, set in a very bizarre setting.
Aside from the random explosions, all's quiet here.
And it's interspersed with 5 or 10 hours of exposition as to how this ridiculous setting and the ridiculous events that we're seeing in the game came to be in the first place. It's very fitting, really. But I digress. The story that Episode 5 tells is one of a very deep fear of the player base not getting it. I think this was inevitable. Episodes 1, 2 and 3 were carpeted with allusions and implications, and Episode 4 was downright allegorical in nature. Allegory is a very dangerous fire to play with, especially when your audience is gamers. And I only partially intend for that to be a dunk on gamers as a demographic. I mean, it is very, very easy and cathartic to dunk on gamers as a demographic. But that's not really my point here. This is my point. If you're going to hide 90% of your engaging, thought-provoking story hooks in inferences and allusions in missable audio logs in your big, explory, stealthy video game, you have to prepare for the possibility that a lot of people are going to miss most of it. In this playthrough, I have been diligent about collecting every single thing that somehow has a conversation attached to it, and because of that, we have a complete, well, nearly complete, it is still only the second video out of several in Episode 5, picture of what Metamorphosis is, who Treglazov is, what he's trying to accomplish, and how he's going about accomplishing it. The painting of this picture happened against a backdrop of the reality that we, you viewers and I, inhabit. A world in which ideas that we used to take for granted, like privacy, free speech, and free thought, are suddenly finding themselves in a state of existential crisis at the hands of nation-states and private corporations. And for what? International intelligence? Data? Advertising? The simple facts of the world that we live in are part of what makes the idea of a scheme like Metamorphosis in any way compelling. The setting itself is what it is. It's definitely very nicely modelled, but it's the backstory, the lore, in which is fired the hooks that latch into our reality and make the idea compelling, that make it into something we might one day have an argument about over whether or not it's art. The conversations, the collectibles, even the video games, kind of, anchor this thing in our reality. But what if you miss it all? When you're limited only to information seen directly in the game, in cutscenes or in direct dialogue, or in a small handful of collectibles you happen to find if you're not exploring thoroughly, this whole thing starts to look very different. One of Republique's sadder truths is that Hope's escape, taken entirely on its own merits, just isn't very interesting. Oh wait, hang on, about to make history here. We actually used a battery pack! Anyway, following Hope's escape alone will bring you into contact with most of the main threads in the game. Like Murray possibly being a traitor, the whole thing with the librarian, pretty much everything we find out about Terminus in episode 3. But it won't really elaborate much on any of it. And then it'll dump you into episode 4, and if you're not being diligent about collecting things and learning the context, episode 4 is going to disappoint you enormously.
Welcome to my domain. What would you like? Sorry to see you go.
All of which brings us to episode 5, which takes all of the game's pretexts about subtlety in all of its lore dumps, and drops them viciously. The player who's coming into episode 5 having not been diligent about collecting things is going to be even more desperate for answers than the player who has. And I will bet you money that that is why the developers decided to drop a direct reference to Edward Snowden right on the critical path of episode 5. Well, in the Zeka branch anyway. We'll see what they did in the Murray branch later. I do not envy the writers one bit the challenge of having to balance all of this. The approach that, obviously, they ultimately took leaves a lot of players open to a lot of risk of missing a lot of context. And that's a problem, because it means they're going to come away with the wrong idea. They're going to come away with the impression of a game that, well, it's just not right. They can come away thinking that the game was vague where it was specific. They'll come away thinking that matters were left open to interpretation when they were in fact settled authoritatively. Worse, they might go online and proceed to spread these opinions to other people, who might then act on them. It's very rare that I come across people who have heard of this game but who haven't played it. When I do, most of the time, they've heard of it because it was reviewed in 0 punctuation. In that review, proprietor Yahtzee stated of the game, in part, that he was very impressed by the proceedings and endings of episode 3, but was left utterly nonplussed by the events of episodes 4 and 5, and lamented that so much of the game's story seemed to be concealed in out-of-the-way collectibles that he was not inclined to collect. And he's not wrong. Maybe if he hadn't missed those things, he might have come away with a different impression of the game's plot than he did. But he missed those things, because that's what people do. Among the general gamer population, obsessive collectors and trophy hunters are a minority. Also, point of fact, République, strictly as a video game that you play, is just kind of not great. The only real incentive to go out of your way to collect this stuff is if you already know that collecting this stuff is the only way you're going to get all of the game's plot, which is, let's be clear, its most compelling feature.
Did you disappear?
An argument can be made that the developers should have taken the opposite approach. That, if all this information is so critical to enjoyment of the plot, then it should be mandatory to get. This approach is not entirely without precedent. It's used to very great effect in games with much more strictly linear plots, and taken to frankly comedic extremes in the Zero Escape series. Personally though, I think République just doesn't have a dense enough primary plot to accommodate such a structure. And the result is, well, it's the game that we got.
What are you doing?
Taking what's in it.
You're not gonna get it open.
You were saying? Look at this.
Oh, is that the only one?
That is the only one.
You can't take it then.
Watch me.
What if the girl comes back looking for it?
The pre-cal. She's been recalibrated. You won't even notice it's missing.
I don't know about that.
Besides, look around you. This place is falling apart. It's all coming down.
On the other hand, here the developers are deftly disposing of a plot hook they planted in episode 1 and then couldn't think of anything to do with. So maybe this game actually is garbage. All I mean to get at with this little diatribe is that Camouflage took a risk structuring the plot of their game in this way. I personally think the risk paid off, but there are a lot of people who think that the game's plot is bad simply because it's missable. And that, well, it's not invalid.
Heading to the vent.
Especially if you're one of those medium is the message types.
Screwdriver just broke.
Whether this is a failure more of the medium than of the message is largely academic, but I'm just saying, whatever it is, République is vulnerable to that failure. And it knows it. Which is why the closer we get to the end, the more blunt the game becomes about what it's really about. It stops short of going what I'm going to perhaps slightly unfairly term full Kojima on the subject. But the fear is there, and it's perceptible. Anyway, here's the plot.
Is that him?
Ah, nuts. Is he breathing?
Is that him? Is that Goran?
Yeah, that's Goran. Well, I guess he's out. We're out of time. Looks like it'll just be the four of them. You did good, Pre-Cal. You and your eye in the sky. The two of you should probably head up to Terminus. What a day. This one's going out to you, Goran Plesko.
You and me, sir.
Roger that. I know who planted the snow globe, and I want to move to arrest immediately. Over.
Copy that. I'll put a party together.
Negative. We need the element of surprise. Where you at currently, Gordon?
Commissary. Sir.
Meet me in the mail dorm laboratory in 10 minutes.
The bathroom. Why is that, sir?
Because you're gonna yourself when I tell you who a traitor is.
Sir?
Just be there in 10 minutes. Over and out.
Well, something that the game constantly does a pretty good job low-key reminding us of is that Derringer is not, in fact, a complete moron. We know, based on their conversation over poker, that Plesko, Walker and Nieves were not exactly the subtlest of conspirators. And personally, I'm of the opinion that Derringer has been onto Plesko since he asked him to be his special investigator. You know the gambit, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Nieves even said at the time that Derringer was playing the wrong hand for the wrong game. I guess he was right about one thing, Derringer was playing a different game. Now, you know who in this place was actually capable of playing their cards close to their chest? Mireille. We don't actually need to walk in here. There's no physical collectibles to pick up. In fact, most of the room is largely unchanged. There is, however, a new thing to scan.
She has my phone. She's got my phone. Who do you think? The squeaky mouse you just escorted home. She must have... Take that stupid mask off and talk to me.
Oh, calm down. Why would she have your phone?
Because I left it sitting out. While she was in here earlier for her exam results. Her qualifying exam. I left it sitting out, right here.
What numbers are in there?
Besides yours, everyone who's anyone.
Wait. Maybe this is a good thing.
Are you insane?
An act like this could spark a revolution.
An act like this will end in execution. Why are you grinning? You look like the cat who ate the canary.
What can I say? I'm a secret admirer of tenacity. That girl's got it.
What she's got is a hand grenade with the pin pulled out.
Good on her. She hasn't even seen the poison manifestos yet.
What poison manifestos?
The ones I just distributed.
This is Mireille Prudhomme. Cancel the alarm. I will see to the contraband violation. Over.
It begins!
Let me guess. Stroke of midnight?
Stroke of genius.
Je te déteste, Waymo.
This conversation is great. It's got plenty of Mireille and Zager being their happy dysfunctional selves. Plus, it's also highly illuminating. It basically confirms that Hope first came into possession of Mireille's phone immediately before the events of the game, by literally nabbing it right out of her room. It also confirms that our number, the number of us, the player, was saved as one of the contacts in that phone. Now why would that be the case? Oh, and right, it underlines that Mireille and Zager have absolutely been working together since the beginning of the game. That's important, I guess.
Okay, I'm in the atrium.
Yeah, I get a bit carried away.
So much destruction.
And mind the
Did
terrain.
Mireille give up on us? I haven't heard from her in a while.
The humble atrium happens to be the linchpin of Episode 5's branching structure. Besides the lift to Terminus, it also offers a T-junction between the headmaster's office and therefore the library, and the security area and the dorms.
The Zager cassette.
Accordingly, Episode 5 starts us off in the library and tells us to get to Terminus. It then offers us a choice of routes by which to get there, both of which will take us through one of the main areas of Metamorphosis, before duly depositing us in the atrium. Accordingly, the atrium offers us a nice symbolic junction point for the end of Episode 5. At this point, we can either take the lift to Terminus and conclude the plot, or we can explore the area from the other branch, and more importantly, loot all of its collectibles. This is pretty fortunate, because Episode 5 does not allow you to do over that choice. Once you've made it on your save file, that's it. And because I have decided to not just show every collectible, but actually attain 100% save file, the cameras notwithstanding, that's exactly what we're going to do. I will, however, be making another video on a separate save, showing the events of Mireille's branch. See, look, there's the elevator. We're just going to ignore that. So, let's backtrack.
I see you like to wander. Fine. It's not like we have anything important to do.
Yes, thank you for that, Zager. Now, at the end of the last video, I said there would be a new gameplay mechanic, and the time has come to deliver. Scattered throughout the security area are these red cameras. And red cameras are, shockingly, actually monitored by the Prizrak. And if we walk in front of one, we will be seen, and a local guard will come to investigate. Their field of view isn't particularly notable, but hey, it's something, right? The red cameras will add a welcome spice to what was previously a really very unthreatening area. Now, you may be wondering, what happens if we hack a red camera? That's a really good question. The answer to that is, Hope won't be detected by a camera while we're hacking it. However, while not in OmniView, we will be treated to a very threatening, very short-lived timer ticking down in the top left corner of our screen. And when it reaches 0, we will be booted out. And the camera will probably then go on to immediately detect Hope if you have not used that time to move her somewhere out of sight. There are a couple of asterisks to this process. Red cameras have their own little preferred arc that they'll stick to. But, while hacking them, you can point them away from that arc, and that will add a tiny bit of return time when you hack away from them. This is not viciously exploitable, but it's there and worth remembering. Now, here's something else that's new in episode 5. Green intel items. Now, if you're an eagle-eyed viewer who nothing gets past, then you might have noticed that I just skipped that conversation. That's because the green intel items are related to a thing that we'll be doing in Marae's episode, and frankly it makes a lot more sense to see them there. However, they are counted towards completion, so I do need to actually get them on this save file. Weird, isn't it? In any case, for the time being, these green conversations are the only thing of interest. Two red cameras and a patrolling guard is a little bit of a pain. But it's nothing much, especially if we just need to pass through. It is, however, an extremely good idea to stop by the confinement room on your way through.
My battery was getting low.
Welcome to my domain. What would you like?
The data broker has one last gift for us.
Extend the time you take over Prismat control cameras.
Overtime is going to make our lives inordinately easier. It's passive, doesn't use energy.
Leaving so soon.
It's a steal at 200, whatever the hell these currency units are. And it gives us 5 entire extra seconds every time we need to look through a red camera. Which reminds me, if you do get kicked out of one of those cameras, you do have to wait a little bit of real time, I think it's 8 seconds again, before you're able to use that camera again. This is not really a problem if you're able to escape and hide.
P0 here.
But if not, that 8 seconds can feel like a lifetime. Our next challenge is this little intersection with the benches and the lockers, between the power plant and the brig. It too has a couple of red cameras and one complete asshole of a guard, who I'm sure we're going to be seeing very shortly. It also has a collectible that we need to just casually stroll across and collect. 5 seconds is a lot of extra time. And do note as well the pro strat that I employed here. Moving Hope near another blue camera and tapping the F for Find Hope button to be able to transfer straight to it. Now, about the guard. Part of the reason he's such a problem is that his patrol route is really just one big long choke point that happens to cover basically all of the ground that we need to. It's very annoying. Here he is. You may additionally note that there are a lot of red cameras on his path, 3 in total. So that's annoying too. Anyway, I've got a spare sleep mine, and this is by far the most annoying guard who still remains conscious, so I think our path is pretty clear. And now we wait. And as if all that other garbage wasn't bad enough, the OmniView hacking tool also actively lies to us about his patrol path, so that's just lovely. One tiny upside of this nonsense is that it does at least give us a pretty good chance to move our position forward a little bit. The kitchen will afford us a much tidier vantage point from which to watch and wait. Also, there's another little green intel item in there, so, you know, I can get that out of the way as well. Sleep mines are the best.
Did you hang up?
No, Hope, we did not hang up.
There goes another good screwdriver.
I suppose I should talk a bit about the screwdriver situation in Episode 5. In addition to your weapons, Episode 5 also deprives you of all of your screwdrivers. The result is that there are exactly 2 screwdrivers in Episode 5 to go with exactly the 2 vents that are there to be crawled through. Which, by the way, are both locked again, having been previously broken. It might have occurred to you that both of the screwdrivers are in the dorms. You may also have noticed that the Zager room in the dorms was actually on the critical path. This is the only time that the game does this. Oh, come on. And if you are in such a good habit of noticing things, you may have also noticed that this is the second definitely female Prizrak, who has male voice lines and who Hope refers to using the male pronouns. We won't hold that against Hope. She, after all, doesn't see their IDs like we do. But you'd think the devs would have been a bit better about the voice lines.
Where'd you get all this stuff? The Zager disciple is secure.
One thing that Episode 5 does not change is how comically easy it is to recover from being captured.
Going in for the steal. Good idea. My battery. Nice.
Moron. Anyway, this wasn't really my plan, but I'm pretty much fine with it. After all, Morales is the only thing of any interest in the power plant room, and the guard out here is long since dealt with, so we're free to get the last couple of collectibles at our leisure. This also makes dealing with the red cameras a lot easier, of course. Now this here is an email. A couple of points of note. March 21st, 2016 is the day before the launch of Episode 5 of République. This is the second time the game has used an absolute date in reference to its own present. It does notably mean that the events of Episodes 1 to 4 cannot have happened during their own releases' present days. I don't know how I feel about the use of dates in this way. I mean, look how that worked out for Ace Attorney. Finally, I have absolutely no idea what they are referring to by Beast Terminal software. Sorry.
I'll be taking this.
Something else I couldn't tell you is exactly what is being done with Cooper's computer. Beyond this door is the cell block we started the game in all the way back in Episode 1, and also the other notable new area added for Episode 5. That makes this about as good a spot to break the video as I think we're going to get. So let's consider our media one more time. There's, quite a bit of it. I like to imagine a line of development that extends from more or less the full corpus of first-person shooter video games that exist, through to Gone Home, through Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and finally terminating with Proteus. Proteus is a procedurally generated 3D walking sim, with a procedurally generated score, and notably without conclusions, directions, or cares. It's not for me, but I admire its purity. Galaxy the Dimensional has managed a number of notable accomplishments in their path towards creating a fun and engaging roguelike twin-stick space shooter that happens to allow you to morph your conventional spaceship into a sword-wielding Gundam whenever you want. But I think its greatest accomplishment is the love letter it has managed to write to the VHS anime aesthetic. There are plenty of occasions playing video games when, even outside of any considerations of the actual quality of what you're playing, you can just tell, when the people who made a game absolutely love their work with every fibre of their being, and Galaxy is absolutely one of those. Game Dev Tycoon is a staple entry in the thriving business simulation genre. It tasks players with, well, managing and operating a game development studio. It's also one of very few games in recent memory whose copy protection features became widely celebrated after its release. The cracked version you can find on torrent sites was actually planted there by the devs and is a special version in which any studio you make will be quickly and efficiently crippled by piracy. By the way, every guide I can find for République says that the guard who's carrying this game should have actually been carrying Campo Santo's Firewatch. This is notable because all the discrepancies I found otherwise about collectible games have all been on the PS4 version and involve PS4 games. Campo Santo don't exactly strike me as a type to object to this kind of coverage. So I wonder if there's a story here. There's no two ways about this. Invisible Ink is a goddamn masterpiece. This game is something of a surprise because the elevator pitch is basically procedural stealth Fire Emblem. And Fire Emblem tried stealth once, and it went poorly. The crux of Invisible Ink's appeal is its combination of Iron Man-style consequence enforcement, with short campaigns. Also notable, absolutely no RNG. The sum of all of these parts is a game that's fiercely tactical, utterly cerebral, and somehow far more approachable than a game that so resembles XCOM has any right to be. Someday, I will make it 20 days into endless mode and get that last trophy. Someday. Myst is weirdly out of place here. It certainly wasn't a Kickstarter success story or a successful mobile game, although there have been mobile versions and developer Cyan Worlds have successfully kickstarted a spiritual sequel, Abduction, which, by the way, was excellent. Myst was an early triumph in the eternal struggle against the ubiquitousness of action games. Embracing exciting emerging technologies of the time such as HyperCard and QuickTime, it tasked players with exploring an island, solving puzzles, and generally just figuring out what the hell was going on. A small but vocal subset of the enthusiast press derided it as a slideshow and claimed that it was out to steal mainstream attention away from other, more worthy, more real games. But Cyan got the last laugh though. Myst was the best-selling PC game of all time until The Sims came out. Darkest Dungeon is a moody role-playing game that notably swaps traditional RPG status ailments such as poison, darkness, and silence for stress, trauma, and grief. Truly a game of our generation. Your party might survive each excursion, but they will pay a price. And you will be responsible. If Cooper were here with us, I'm sure he could provide some analogues to Hope's current situation. Unfortunately, Cooper is not here with us, because we kind of threw him to the wolves in an attempt to aid our own escape. Whoops.
Glenn Greenwald's harrowing gospel of Saint Snowden, with a tasty subplot of the author's ascension from doubting Thomas to true believer. The book unfolds with Greenwald's personal encounter in Hong Kong with the Messiah himself, then evolves into a lecture on how the world surveillance state works based on outdated and, more importantly, illegally obtained documents. The author blames shadowy forces for why his book isn't a bestseller, blind to the real reason. The public is bored of this, Greenwald, and prefer a safe society to the one quislings like you are trying to impose.
The condescending tone of this aside, Treglazov's actually more or less right on this one. In fact, Zager makes the exact same point in one of his tapes in this episode. People don't like it when their illusions of safety and security in fair and functioning states are shattered. Balancing the truth and the peace is never easy.
What happens on the job should stay on the job. And that includes lapses in conscience. WikiLeaks dabbles in the shame industry. And this is a hagiography of the patron saints. Greenberg doesn't seem to understand that sins are property of the church.
What the hell did any of that mean? The most charitable and most coherent reading of this that I can come up with is that maybe Treglazov thinks that the right to data privacy is an invention of the people who are telling us that our right to data privacy has been violated, and that it is not in fact real. That's the best I got.
Goldsmith and Wu are right beyond their knowing. The borderless world envisioned by the Internet's founders is illusory. But another borderless world is possible by expanding one nation's borders. Our house has many mansions, and domain names rightly should fall under our domain.
Here, once again, we have a book whose broad conclusion is favourable to Treglazov and so escapes unscathed from his judgment. Wu and Goldsmith argue that the internet only became what it is today because of government intervention. Treglazov agrees, and adds, what if that, but evil?
Do you know the #1 sentiment responsible for deaths by dual enlistment and suicide combined? Romance. Create a cult of thrill and honor, and your acolytes will multiply almost as quickly as the body count. Harding gives readers precisely that. He romances Edward Snowden, whose crimes loom greater than war itself, and in so doing, becomes accessory to treason.
And there you have it, folks. Edward Snowden, whose crimes loom greater than war itself. What a take. I am in awe of this take. Its simplicity, its beauty, its sheer magnitude. What even is international context and moral complexity in the shadow of a take like that? What a note to go out on. Next time, we'll storm the computer room.